What's it like to run a national housing operation from Portland, Maine? If there was one thing the state of Maine could do to be a better place to do business in, what do you think it would be? Welcome to the Boulos Beat podcast series. I'm your host, Tony McDonald, filling in for Greg Boulos. Boulos Company is Northern New England's largest commercial real estate services firm, with offices in Portland, Maine, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and Manchester, New Hampshire. We've been selling and leasing real estate in Maine and New Hampshire since 1975. This podcast is designed to provide insight into Maine's business movers and shakers. Speaking of movers and shakers, I'd like to welcome Joe Wishcamper to the Boulos Beat. Hi, Joe.
Hello, Tony.
How are you, sir?
You failed to mention that you and I are in the same building 3 floors apart.
We are.
Right,
Yeah. So I've known you for a long time, but what I don't know is, when did you start in Portland? What brought you here? How's a good old boy from West Texas end up in Portland, Maine, running a national housing operation?
A long circuitous route. So, Tony, I grew up in the panhandle of Texas in Amarillo, and my people were poor people who lived through the Dust Bowl and the Depression, and money was always an issue, and I was always a dreamer. My dream was to go to an Ivy League school, and lo and behold, I was a good student, and I did get into Yale, and I'd never been out of Texas. I got a full scholarship to Yale, not based on academics, but based on need, and or not based on athletics, but based on financial need. And I went across the country my freshman year. First time I'd ever been on an airplane, landed in New Haven.
Wow.
And that got me to New England. And then when I finished college, I went to Harvard Law School in Cambridge. And from Harvard, I went to New York and basically failed at the practice of law and left there after a few months. It just wasn't for me. And after kicking around in an investment banking company for a couple of years, I got a job in Boston in an affordable housing company. And long story short is that 6 years later, I got a chance to start a business here in Maine because I'd been the project manager for properties in Maine, and my boss, God love him, decided that he didn't want to do what looked to me like a great deal, but for him it was too small. It was only 50 units, and that was in 1976. Section 8 was only 2 years old. I arrived in Maine and slept in the community room of my project in Biddeford, Maine for about a year. The project was called Prospect Manor. It was my first project, and it was a Section 8 project. And it was, fortunately, it was a good project, got me going. A year later, my family moved up. And that's a story too, which I'll tell you quickly. So Gordy Hamlin, who you know, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure.
Was a banker at what was then Canal Bank.
Canal Plaza.
Key Plaza was Canal Plaza. Yeah,
Right.
it is Canal Plaza. Yeah. And that's because the Key Bank now in Portland, Maine is the successor to Canal Bank. And Gordy he just decided he believed that I would succeed, I guess. And so he convinced his board to make $1.3 million loan to me to do that project, purely on the basis of no assets. It was, if there's such a thing as a character loan, that's what it was. And I owe a lot to Gordy for that. He really got me started.
Wow. I never knew that.
Yeah.
I never knew. So you've been kind of at least my observations, kind of the genesis of a low-income housing tax credit cluster here in Maine. When I think of when I first met you, I'd go to your office and you had guys working with you then, Tim O'Neill, Chris Bowden, guys like Charlie and Roger Gendron were around, Danny Smith. And my observation was it seemed it all kind of emanated from your offices. What was it like then, being in the early days of the
LIHTC world? Well, I was one of the first couple or 3 Section 8 developers who were operating in Maine. We're based in Maine and operating in Maine. And I think that a lot of people learned the business because I had a couple of years, of advanced education down in Boston. And the first person I hired was Sharon Mitchell Lunner, who later became the head of the Maine State Housing Authority and then the head of FAME. And Sharon was my sidekick for a while. But for me, I think that one of the keys to what I've been able to do in my life is my ability to spot talent and to associate myself with smart people. And there were just a whole number of smart young people. I mean, Charlie Gendron, Danny Smith, Roger Gendron, those guys were in their mid-20s at that time, and they were hungry as it could be.
Yeah.
And, they became the brokers of a lot of the deals that I did. And Tim O'Neill is another person who was an early hire for me. And throughout my career, which is now, I have to confess, it's a 50-year career. It's a 45-year career here in Maine, but it's a 50-year career altogether in affordable housing. And there's just a whole litany of people that I owe my success to. And it all has to do with the relationships that I had with them or with the fact that they went to work for me.
Interesting.
Want to know who some of them are?
Sure, yeah.
Well, I just happen to have brought a list because I really do think that I owe most of, my quote-unquote success to other people. And so here's my little list. I'll just mention these people. Cindy Taylor, Brian Poulin, Bill Houlihan, Dick McGoldrick, Chris Poulin, Matt Kesselhat, Roger Gendron, Charlie Gendron, Danny Smith, Chris Bowden, Brian Shumway, Penn Lindsay, Kevin Rose, David Lockery, Sharon Lunner, Charlie Allen, and I said Cindy Taylor. Cindy, great person, great colleague. I was a little reluctant to make this list because I was afraid I was going to leave somebody out that was important. So I would like to say I apologize to anybody that I left out of that list.
That's like a who's who of successful housing developers and operators.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Well, you benefit from the company you keep. So.
Right. Yeah.
So, what's it like to run a national housing operation from Portland, Maine? Because you really are national in scope. I think you've got more going on out of Maine than you do in Maine now.
I have interests in projects in, I think, 23 states now. And in almost every case, I have partners or at least management companies that are local to those geographies. And what I'd say is that it's mostly good, and the good part is it absolutely expands one's opportunities, and it also gets people like me to have the chance to do bigger scale projects. And so when I first started here in Maine, 50 units was a big project. I thought when I did my first 90 unit project that was, the big time. Well, today in the national markets, the bigger players don't want to look at anything under 250 or 300 units.
Wow.
They want deals that are $50 million, $100 million deals. And I'm not saying that we do that regularly, but we do that, and I do it with partners who know what they're doing. And I'm at the age where I do very little of the work, fortunately. I don't like going to planning board meetings.
Yeah.
But
been to a few though.
Well, I went to one recently, and it actually wasn't bad.
Yeah.
I was home at 8:30, and that's probably the first time ever. But the mostly good part is the bigger opportunities and the more opportunities, and the other thing that's really good about this from an affordable housing standpoint is that there are poor people everywhere. There are people who need affordable housing everywhere. And so you don't have to really have the local knowledge that you need to be an operator in a market rate or conventional kind of a sector. So those are the good things. And I think that the only bad thing that I can really, well, there are two bad things I can think about. One is that there's often a resistance in every local market to out-of-staters or to people from away, because people who live in a particular geography think they own that geography,
Sure.
and they'll do whatever they can politically to keep the out-of-stater out. And then the second thing that's not great is trying to take care of these properties from a distance.
Yeah.
But that's where the regional management companies come in. It's still hard to asset manage at a distance, but with property management at a distance, it's an even, more of a handicap.
Oh, I see. We all think of you, or a lot of people think of you, as an affordable housing developer, which has been a lot of your work. But my first dealings with you, 127 years ago, I checked.
You checked. Yeah.
It wasn't affordable housing. You did other and have done other commercial real estate stuff as well. Isn't that correct?
Yeah. I thought I knew how to do other things, and I learned in the big recession. There was one really big recession that most people watching us don't know about, and that was in 1989 and in the early 90s.
Yeah. Right when I got in the business.
Right when you got in the business. Yeah. And Tony, I got my clock clean in the commercial stuff I was doing.
Yeah.
And it was only the affordable stuff that kept me in business and afloat at that time.
Wow.
But by that time, I had done the Gateway Parking Garage, for example.
I remember that, yeah.
And we had done a couple of buildings for L.L. Bean, and I'd done some commercial or residential subdivisions, and oh goodness, we owned some office buildings in the Old Port, what have you. But
you bought a Portland glass portfolio too.
Yeah, we bought Danny and Charlie and Chris and I bought a portfolio of Portland glass properties throughout northern New England.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that worked out well.
Yeah, it seemed like every time we'd put you in a affordable housing box, you'd pop up.
But, I don't do that anymore. I think the only non-affordable housing deal that I'm involved in now is a 1031 deal that I did in 2008 or 9, where we bought a big FedEx facility down in Durham, North Carolina, got a chance to expand it, and recently renewed that for another 10 years. It's a pretty big building. It's about 175,000 square foot building.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice stuff.
Yeah. If I had the same success with all the commercial things I'd ever done, I probably wouldn't be doing affordable housing.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
Everything's
everybody
benefits.
Gets lucky.
Yeah, you get good
sometimes.
in your area and you stick to it, stick in your lane.
That was a pure stroke of luck. Yeah.
You've been doing other stuff lately too. Solar comes to mind.
Yeah.
How'd you get into solar? And I see some parallels with low-income housing tax credit work. I don't know if you do, but can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I like talking about solar. And my understanding of solar is pretty limited. I'm really a business person, not a solar person. It's certainly not. I couldn't tell you how solar panels work. I just know that they work, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah.
So let me just start and say I owe a lot to Revision Energy for my opportunity here, because it started when we were putting solar onto a number of our apartment complexes. And I decided, out of state, and I decided to put solar panels on my house in Freeport, across the water from you guys.
Yep.
And Revision put them in, and I got to know the people there, and it dawned on me that I could probably use some of the credits and losses from solar. Solar is a passive activity under the tax law, but if you're a material participant, you can actually use those tax benefits
So if
against
you're
your
in
other.
the solar business.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so I decided that I would actually take a role rather than just being a user of electricity. I'd be an owner/developer. And that was 2 or 3 years ago. And since that time, Revision, which is a great and growing company, has basically sold me in some form or fashion about 20 solar facilities throughout northern New England.
Wow,
and I've done 7 others. So I think that the portfolio that I now have, or we in my company now have, is between 25 or 26 or 27 facilities.
God, all in 3 years. Just jumped
Yeah,
in and
all in
went.
3 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Jumping gears a little bit, since we're talking numbers, how many apartment units would you say you're involved in?
At the present time, I'm not totally sure, but I would say somewhat south of 10,000.
Yeah.
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 It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So you asked me about the similarities in the
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot, because you essentially use debt to create additional basis, and it's a tax-driven business. It's partly what I think of as financial-driven, in terms of raw economics, but it's largely about the tax rules that apply to creating tax shield for either people like me or for wealthy individuals who have a lot of passive income, or for corporations, because corporations can use them to an unlimited extent. Mm-hmm. So we do syndication the same way that affordable housing developers do. We have a high amount of regulation from both the Public Utilities Commissions and even ISO New England and Central Maine Power and Versant and the other utilities that we deal with. And we really have to understand all of the small variables that can affect the outcome of a project. So it's not a coupon clipping business at all. It's a business that the structures are very complex, and the ability to make mistakes is rife. And if you make a really bad mistake, you can really suffer. So from my standpoint, I think that one of the things that we do well in my company is we manage risk, and we're probably better at managing risk than we are at managing upside. Mm-hmm. And so managing risk in the solar business it fits us.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that analogy is that in the housing business, certainly with Section 8, you've got an income stream that's established really by others.
Yeah, that's right.
Not necessarily subject to wild market swings.
Right.
And you've got to manage the expenses.
Well, structure. Yeah, and in solar, we deal in typically 20 or 25-year contracts mm-hmm. that are just about similar in length to the length of a Section 8 contract.
Yeah.
So we can finance against a long-term stream of revenue.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have a project that stands out as your favorite or one you're particularly proud of? If you do a good job with this question, I won't ask you, do you have one that you think is awful? Okay.
Well, that would take longer, Tony, because there'd be a lot more of those. You're giving me a chance to talk about the one that I'm proudest of, and that is, I had this crazy idea 10 years ago that we could help some of our very, very poor residents down in Mississippi, and decided to form a nonprofit to provide really transformational services to them. And my wife and I ended up starting that organization. And a woman here in Maine named Betsy Beeman, who is now the president of CEI, was our first person to help us start to plan that. And we now have a staff down there of a lot of people in this nonprofit. Carol and I are barely involved at this point, but they're serving like 1,000 families, and they're just achieving unbelievable recognition, but more than that, impact among these poor, 100% African American and probably 95% single parent families.
And I recall either you or Carol describing it to me years ago. It was about breaking the cycle of poverty, and that it just...
That's the idea.
Yeah,
that's the idea.
Yeah.
So if anybody's interested, the website is springboard2.org, springboardto.org, and you can read about what they're doing. It's really cool.
Good.
Other than that, my favorite real estate project, I have to probably say, was the Roque Block up in Auburn,
Yeah.
which was a derelict building on the Androscoggin right in downtown. Yeah. And in 1980, the city of Auburn and I got together and decided that it was totally abandoned. The only thing that lived in there were the few live pigeons that were in the building, you know, surrounded by literally thousands of dead pigeons. And we were able to get funding, and in 1980, you probably remember, long-term interest rates were 13 to 15%. And Maine Housing found a way of floating bonds and helping us get that project going. And there was something that HUD developed at that point in time that would provide extra Section 8 funding to cover the spike in interest rates that had taken place. I've kind of forgotten what it was called.
I remember that, but
Yeah.
it was there for a while and it was gone.
Yeah. And
Very nice of them at the time.
It was a lifeline.
Yeah.
So anyhow, that was a really complicated one in a very challenging environment.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Good. You and I have been around a while. You longer than me, I can say, but
You didn't have to say that.
I didn't have to, but I wanted to.
Yeah.
We're in a real upcycle right now, and it's lasted longer than a lot of us would have thought. I've been telling my younger brokers, it's going to crash at any minute. Save your money. Things are going to turn around. Hasn't happened yet. We'll see. But you've been through a few ups and downs, and can you say anything about that? I mean, what that's like, what the experience has been going through those types of things?
Sure. Yeah. I even brought a quote that I want to read. Here's the
You
quote.
had quite a list there, don't you?
No, I only had that list in this quote. This is it.
All right.
It says, a bull market is a market with upward momentum, causing property investors to mistake themselves for geniuses.
Yeah.
I don't know who said that, but
A lot of bull.
a lot of bull.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Tony, first one that I experienced was in 1973, which was the first OPEC oil crisis.
Yep.
A lot of people went down in that one. The next one was in 1980 when interest rates, I paid 21% on my construction loan on a couple of properties.
That stings.
And and it happened quickly. And these were floating rate construction loans.
Yeah.
And then the big one, the big one was 1989 through the early 90s. That was the S&L crisis. That was the bank crisis. The Resolution Trust Corporation took over all the bad assets of all the banks, and they just beat the hell out of borrowers. We had a minor one in 2001, and then we had the other big one, which was 2008 and 9.
Yeah.
And so what did you ask me?
Have you been around a while? And I guess you have, but you've survived, obviously.
No, but you asked me something.
Well,
about
just what it's like to go through those, and it's probably not a fair question. I mean, how bad can things get? I think a lot of people in our listening audience, they've just never been through a bad time.
Yeah.
And I think if you haven't been through it, I mean, I was not where you were on some of these things, but I was a broker. And I recall there being times when I had no commissions on the books, just nothing coming in the door. And that's unthinkable now.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe there's nothing to talk about there.
Well, no, there is. I tell you what there is. Two things come to mind. One is it will happen to everybody.
Yeah.
It can't not happen in the same sense that up markets can't not happen. And number two is when it does happen, you spend all your time on the stuff that doesn't make you anything. You spend all your time trying to save things from taking you down, and you don't have any fun at all. I mean, it's all stress at that point.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that I'm winding my real estate stuff down slowly now, I mean, One reason, obviously, is estate planning, but the other is I just don't want that stress when it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough times.
Yeah.
Speaking of stress,
Yeah.
anything keep you up at night? What keeps you up at night? What
Ooh.
bothers you?
The thing that keeps me up at night, and it almost literally does, but it doesn't really literally, is the fear that there could be a major fire in one of my properties.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. You know, we have a lot of, I say we, my partners and I, have a lot of properties that are pretty dense because they're elevator buildings, and we've got, you know, in many cases, a lot of people who are fairly immobile, older people.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are sprinkled, some are not. Yeah, and what happened in the Bronx could happen to any owner.
Yeah. You can do all the right things, but you can't control the actions of your residents.
Yeah, and we've had that happen, Tony.
Yeah.
You know, I think I told you about a property that we have in Nebraska that we had just finished rehabbing, 11-story elderly building, and within 2 weeks of the time that we pulled out the construction people and had the, you know, opening ceremony, some guy got into the building with a blanket and a bunch of booze and started a fire in the emergency stairs,
Mm-hmm.
and the smoke set off the alarms, and the alarms were also the sprinklers, and the whole building got sprinkled, and we had to evacuate it.
And you've done all the right things.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we had to, you know, we had to replace walls, and we had to replace carpet, and we, you know, all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And it was probably 5 months later before we were able to reoccupy.
Oh, wow.
Now, there were no people hurt in that case,
Yeah.
so we were lucky,
Yeah.
but those things happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's scary. Any personal regrets or things you would have done differently? You know, it's okay to say no, you know, if you're happy.
No, there are. I mean,
Yeah.
what I would say is I don't have any regrets about properties I didn't buy, and I've never had a regret about a property that I sold. And my regret would be that I didn't understand the value of relationships over the priority of transactions earlier in my career. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is I was just too aggressive as a young man in the business to really realize that any business is ultimately a business of relationships. So I probably have some amends to make out there.
Well,
know?
that's maturity. I mean, I think anybody who's successful has a certain amount of drive, and when you're young and immature, it's unchecked, and it takes a while to realize maybe I should back off a little bit.
Yeah, you got it. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you still buying stuff? Are you just content with what you got, or sounds like you said you're starting to sell?
Well,
some
we're
stuff
buying
too.
solar,
Yep.
and we're developing solar, and mostly I'm divesting of real estate, but I'm a deal junkie.
Yeah.
You know, you probably know a few.
Yeah.
And and I have a colleague named Jim Hanley who you introduced me to,
Yeah.
Tony.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jim is the best.
Yeah.
And I want to help Jim meet his goals,
Yeah.
and we together are going to do some deals, and we just don't know what they're going to be.
That's great. He's a good
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
I was delighted to bring you two together.
Yeah.
So let's see. If there's now you work nationally, but you're Maine based. If there is one thing the state of Maine could do to be a better place to do business in, what do you think it would be?
That one's easy for me. I would have a constitutional amendment to abolish referenda.
Yeah. There's another one coming up right now, and that's a very good point. It's so easy for a very few people who don't know what they're talking about to cause problems for others, and really work against their own causes, the unintended consequences.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. And unfortunately, too, most referenda are decided based on emotional factors and ideological factors rather than based on facts.
Yeah, it's a beauty contest.
That's why we have a legislature. You know,
Yeah.
they're supposed to actually take the time to understand the issues.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's very unfortunate. We've gone through it with many different efforts to shut down Maine Yankee. Now we've got it to shut down Central Maine Power Company and buy those assets. The power line through the state. There's just no end to the mischief that referenda can cause.
Well, and back to housing, right here in Portland, the new Green Deal has just stymied housing development. in
Well,
Portland.
yeah, right.
And the people that are proposed it, they're good people. They want the right. We all want affordable housing, but that's not the way.
Well,
to
we're
do
talking
it.
politics now, and I don't know
Yeah,
if we should, but I will
yeah,
tell you that I agree with you,
good.
and you know, we need.
We'll do this in the sequel.
Well, yeah, we do need to create an environment that people are not afraid of bringing their businesses and their money to the state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any current events or developments that you see as significant in the business environment here in Maine or nationwide? Things that you think about that are significant, changing?
Yeah. Well, inflation, obviously.
Yeah.
A deficit. I mean, all the things that everybody else is concerned about. But I think in the long run, it's really whether our society can have any kind of unity to it, so that we can actually accomplish things together and create, a better community, make this place a better place.
Yeah.
We're very lucky, Tony. You know that.
Yeah.
We're going to be fine, but it's all the people out there who are not going to be fine
Right.
that need the government to work.
Right. Government's got its place.
Yeah.
And it's got to work well, and it doesn't work well right now. So you get exposure to the whole country. Do you see any prime opportunities for Greater Portland or Maine in the next decade or so?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've come around to feeling like what's happened here in terms of, the discovery of this place. I think it's real.
Yeah.
And I think people are not going to want to be in unlivable places like the big cities and, the big polluters and what have you. I think Maine, and with global warming or climate change, I think Maine is going to be an attractive place. And in a digital age, you don't have to worry about being at the end of the railroad because nobody gets on the railroad anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you see any big pitfalls that Maine has that we might avoid?
It's the political pitfall of being unwelcoming to entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
To productivity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you see that everywhere, or more so in Maine, or
Tony,
is there parochialism here?
Tony. You don't see that in a lot of places.
Yeah.
I mean, in the places where people are going, in the South and the Southwest, and in parts of the West, there's a common belief that growth is good.
Mm-hmm. So they just welcome you there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're even in Oregon where we work, which is a lot like Maine in other respects. We get a lot of cooperation from government and from, people in the culture.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Government tries to really help business in many of these places. Believe it or not.
It's a concept that's rather foreign.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Really? Say that again. Any predictions, hopes, warnings, closing thoughts?
Well, it's been fun talking to you, Tony. You're a good interviewer, and I don't really think so. I mean, my predictions are that other people are going to have a really great ride, adventurous ride. I'm almost 80 years old. I'll be watching from the sidelines, hopefully for a long time.
You've said that several times, but you keep
I
coming
have said
back.
that,
You keep getting back in the game.
But the warning is what we talked about earlier, which is nobody should think that an upcycle is going to go on forever. And
Yeah.
so I think that being super careful is super advice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's coming from a smart guy, so I'll take that advice. Joe, thank you for spending time with us today. You're a legend, and a lot of people are going to get a chance to know a little bit more about you when they watch this podcast. So,
Well, Tony, I'll take that flattery. Thank you.
All right.
And I appreciate our friendship, and I thank you for inviting me.
And if you'd like to learn more about the Boulos Company, please be sure to visit us at www.boulos.com. You can also find us at the Boulos Company on Facebook and at LinkedIn, and at the Boulos Co. on Instagram and Twitter. And lastly, if you want to know the secret to owning real estate, it's pretty simple. Just be sure to outlive your debt.